Well, welcome to my favorite time of the year and to one of the most controversial times of the year for Christians, especially now in the age of social media. You see, every year about this time, actually, maybe even as early as November, you will see posts on Facebook, on X, Instagram, Snapchat, and the like that will say, Christmas is really pagan. Christmas is terrible. Christians shouldn't be doing this. You're engaging in pagan festivity. Really? Really? The thing about the internet is anybody can put anything up there. And then they quote each other as authorities when, if you trace it back, they're not authorities. And the lessons we do here on Monday mornings, who told you about or who told you what, are all about tracing things. So, can you criticize Christmas? Sure. A lot of people don't like the over commercialization. I don't either. When surprise, honey, Merry Christmas, here's a brand new $75,000 truck. That seems a bit over the top. It can breed discontent in children who believe that all the other kids are getting all the marvelous things. It can cause depression in the lonely. And as a man who's fought depression off and on his entire life, I don't take that lightly. And I understand the concept of being lonely even when I'm not alone. So I get that. If you're suffering during Christmas, reach out to us. info@oursafeharbor.com. We want to be there to talk to you, just to be a part of your community. Sometimes people will say, well, it's too dangerous now because of Islamist and because of other radical groups. If you celebrate out in public, you become a target. Sadly, that is true in many, many places. And in fact, just as a heads up, in the new year, I'm going to be doing a rather pointed series on Islam, and then I'll look at other religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the like. And we will probably do those all on Monday mornings. So they'll take a while since they're in 15-minute slots. Just be aware. Some say, well, no, this is all just Catholicism. Catholicism whitewashed paganism, and now we've taken it on. No. To understand Christmas, you got to go a long way back to the pre-winter celebrations. Yes, pre-winter. As winter was coming on, celebrations would take place. Food was stored all over Europe. This is basically a Eurocentric concept. You just need to be aware of that. And Europe at that time would include some sections of North Africa. It's that whole section of the West, as we would call it. And pre-winter, the bringing in of the harvest, the celebration of harvest, storing, communities worked like mad together to store everything they could possibly have for the winter. And then in the midwinter, when you realized that winter lasts a while, and you started noticing when the sun rose just a little earlier than it used to rise. So you'd hit midwinter, and you're passing midwinter. They would celebrate by bringing people into community areas, which a lot of the homes were community areas. Multiple families lived in just one long home. But however they did it, some would go house to house because of smaller homes. You would do several things. One is that you would bring in a log. Now, when we think of burning like a Yule log, we think of bringing in something which is a foot, maybe a foot and a half, however big your fireplace is, and really big, and let it just burn for a long time. This wasn't that. They would cut something which is a tree, which is very big around. It could be 10 inches, it could be 20 inches. And they would bring it in, and this section of the log could be 12 feet long. And they would stick one end of it in the fire. And as that burned, they'd move the log a little bit further. And so this thing lasted a long time. But it was a way of sympathetic magic to bring the light back into the world. They would also light some candles, which at that time were basically little pools of animal fat with a string in it, or a bit of straw in it to keep it lit. They would give each other presents, very simple presents, a piece of dried fruit, a sewing needle, a fishing hook. And this was a way of saying, I believe that you are going to survive the winter. I believe that you are valuable enough that I will give you something very precious, because those things were very precious. Food, obviously, if you run out, you die. But also things like a sewing needle, Go out now and make one. Come back in the next couple minutes. You can't. They were very difficult to make. Fishing hooks the same, fishing line and the like. They would find ways to show how precious you are by giving you something, but also it was a way of saying, I believe you will survive. And I believe that you will go on and prosper into the spring. The Mesopotamians celebrated 12 days. And that sound familiar? 12 days? At the midwinter to worship their god Marduk in his battle against the monsters of chaos. That was a very common theme among paganism. The Greeks had similar belief with their god Kronos, who was a god of time, and he fought the Titans. And the Titans were locked up in a place called Hades. And Hades then became a name just for the realm of the dead. Good, bad, righteous, Titans, or not gods. Persians and Babylonians had their own celebrations where slaves and masters would exchange places for a few days. And there would be roasting of each other, mocking each other. I would imagine on the slaves' part that was somewhat subdued, knowing that you were going to revert back to form within a few days. In Northern Europe, everybody wants to talk about Saturnalia. Yeah, Rome had Saturnalia. It started mid-December, continued to January 1st. It had masquerades, parties, visiting friends, exchanging gifts. They had all of that. They used laurel, a green leafy plant, in their homes and lit candles day and night for the same reason the people in the north did. Sympathetic magic, evergreen, spring is coming back, light in the house. So, by the way, Saturnalia, you talk about him all the time, the god Saturnalia. You just refer to his other name, Saturday. The names of the days of the week are named after gods. So, is that bad? Should we not do those? Here's the thing. Something can be pagan, and then we take it, and it's not pagan anymore. It isn't. It's ours. And Christians have done that throughout the last 2,000 years. Here's a spring that this particular local god has created in the ground, and if you drink water from it and then leave an offering, well, then you might be healed of a disease. And the Christian missionaries coming by will say, water is a gift from God. This was a great saint who came and started this well for you. They just took them over. And he took over these days as well. And so no, there are no false gods. And those gods are not out there rejoicing because we have a Christmas tree in our home. In Northern Europe, people lived in constant fear of disease. A cut and you would die. My great-great-grandfather, John Printer Mead, died of tetanus. He just cut, and it wasn't a bad cut, just a scratch on his hand from a barbed wire fence, and he died. That's the way people were. In fact, in America, until the 1930s, in the average family, by the time the youngest child was 14, the dad was dead. And many, many, many generations never met their grandparents because they were gone before then. I never met my great-grandparents. It's really odd for me to see people have so many great-grandparents whenever they're born today. I would like to have met them, fair enough. But when the days got darkest in Scotland and Scandinavia, the sun can disappear for days at a time. And if it's not because it's not above the horizon, it's because of the thickness of clouds and the howling wind. Their view of hell in Northern Europe was a place of eternal wind and cold, not fire. Fire to them was very, very welcome. So their version of hell was cold. So scouts would be sent to the highest mountains to measure the time that the sun would appear or not. And whenever the sun did appear, people would celebrate. They would tie apples together and dried fruits to trees to remind themselves that fruit was coming back and the land would be fruitful again. The people would build temples to mark the passage of the sun, to find as solar calendars of such. At least that's what we think they were doing there. And so all of these traditions, evergreens, a sign of life, even everlasting life in the middle of winter and danger. Mistletoe, it was magical because it grew from the air. They didn't understand how it grew. It had to be a gift from God, assuring us that life was coming, and therefore fertility. And that's why people kiss under the mistletoe. They used to do more than that. Gifts, as a way of saying you're a treasured person, were exchanged. Lights, whether from bonfires, logs in the hearth, or the big Yule log that you just moved along the long row house and let it burn for a long time. You would have shiny bits of silver, tin, pewter to reflect from the candles. It was all about hope. And the tree, in its form that we think of today, came from Germany, Northern Europe, once again. Some teachers used the tree as a way to teach about God. They would hang it upside down, by the way. It rarely was planted the way we do now. I've heard that in some American families in particular, they now hang the tree upside down because there's more room for gifts. That might be going a bit much, but hey, you do you, right? Somebody told me the other day, Patrick, just be yourself. And I thought, I have no other option. If I'd been given other options, I might have chosen it, but this is the only, anyway. Hung upside down with food and shiny things in its branches. Teachers would then use the 3 points to talk about the Trinity, because they used everything to teach about Christianity. And then songs. Songs have always been used to drive back darkness, to drive back evil. Think of the spirituals that were sung by the slaves on the American continent, that many of them are still haunting and still used today in worship. The songs of faith and songs of driving back the darkness and swing low, sweet chariot. Wow. And so, songs like that, rebel yells in war, and then carols that we sing at night from house to house. All of this is beautiful. Missionaries met these celebrations and said, we can use these to teach about Jesus. And they did, and we do today. Sometime, we don't know when, but the earliest possible mention of people celebrating the birth of Christ was around 98 AD. But we can say that at 354 AD, it was set that the birth of Christ would be celebrated on December 25th. As far as I can determine, no one was saying he was actually born on December 25th, because he wasn't. Almost certainly he was born in the spring of the year because of the way the shepherds were in the with their flocks in the fields by night. I'll get that right. So eventually a calendar was changed. And if you don't know about the history of that, we've had 2 major calendars in the West. They realized the first one was not entirely accurate and we were missing some days. And so they had to adjust it. Well, the Orthodox Church never went with the new calendar. So there's 12 days between our Christmas and their Christmas. And that's the 12 days of Christmas comes into play in there as well. So where did Santa come from? Real guy. He is the second most popular name for churches. St. Nicholas Church, St. Nicholas this, that, and the other. The first one is Mary. And so he was right up there with him. He was an actual bishop. He spent 10 years in prison for refusing to worship Roman gods. When Constantine took over, he was freed. Very little is known about his actual life, but a couple of the legends are that there was a man with 3 daughters who was just bereft. He was just torn apart because he had no money for his daughters to marry. Back then, for some silly reason, if a woman wanted to be married, she had to come with cash and didn't have it. Therefore, they were going to have to be sold as servants or slaves. And when St. Nicholas heard about this, of course, at the time he was just Nicholas, he went by their house at night quietly, didn't want them to know, and threw in gold coins. And gold coins landed in their socks that were hung up by the fire to dry, because every week or 2 you'd need to wash those things, rinse them out with water and hang them up to dry. And the coins, it says, fell in the stockings, and that's where we get the idea of stockings and putting gifts in the stockings. By the way, since there were 3 of them, then gold went there. The 3 golden circles are still the sign of pawnbrokers to this day. He's a patron saint of sailors and pawnbrokers and so many other things. He's also known for bringing gifts to children in his community. He was not rich, but whatever money he got, he immediately turned it around and gave it to the poor, either in gifts or just as money. He died in December of 326. The turning of him into a red and white cloaked thing happened in America, with a lot of help from the Dutch, mind. We had a huge Dutch presence in early America. New York once was known as New Amsterdam. The Pennsylvania Dutch, you perhaps have heard of that. He was known as Sinterklaas, St. Nicholas, Sinterklaas in the Dutch, and that became Santa Claus in the American vernacular. And then Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol. Clement Moore wrote The Night Before Christmas, and Washington Irving's tale of St. Nicholas going from house to house to reward the faithful turned Nicholas into Santa Claus forever. Thomas Nast completed the picture with his political cartoons set aside. He did celebratory holiday cartoons, and he's the first one to depict Santa in the modern way with big chubby, big belly, big smile, cherubic cheeks, all of that. It's fine. It's Christian. I would say we can celebrate it and show our faith. We can talk about Jesus at this time of year. We can share gifts. We can give more to the poor. We can give more to food banks. We can give more to charities. We can teach our children that as well. You can grab a Compassion International catalog and buy a cow for a village or buy a well for a village. You can do these things. And if you don't have but $5 or $10, you can put it in a pool and just say, hey, use this any way you can. It's a great way to celebrate the coming of Christ. And we'll talk more about this next week. But if you've been hesitant, get that tree up. That one was my mother's before she passed. And so I'm happy to have it now. Put up the tree, or don't, but enjoy and celebrate the birth of Christ. No, maybe it didn't happen in December, but I can't think of a better time to celebrate it. God bless. We'll talk to you next time. Cheers.